My name is Anthony Cosentino, and welcome to my Ancient World Explorers project. In this episode, we are going to analyze the architecture of ancient Greece. In order to do so, we will answer four important questions. First, in a society, how do we know which buildings are important? Second, what do these buildings look like? Third, how were these buildings built? And fourth, why were these buildings built and what purpose did they serve? Let's start with our first question. So, how do we know which buildings are important? Well, people like to spend money on important things, and the ancient Greeks spent a lot of money on taxes. The government then used the tax money to build the people what they wanted, which was temples, and lots of them. Now let's move on to our second question. What did ancient Greek structures look like? Well, at that time there were three main styles of architecture, which we will represent using columns. First, we have Doric architecture. This style was mainly found on the mainland of Greece. Its column was wide, plain, and sturdy. Second, we have Ionic architecture. This style was mainly found in eastern Greece and the islands. Ionic columns are thinner with a scroll design on the capital, or the top of the column. Finally, we have Corinthian architecture. This style was rarely found in ancient Greece and was used more often in the Roman world, but it originated in ancient Greece and was used there first. The capital is very elaborate and features acanthus leaves. Some popular Greek buildings include the Doric Parthenon, the Ionic Erechtheum, and the Corinthian Temple of Zeus at Athens. These basic building styles came to be known as the classical orders, which would be the basis for most architecture in ancient civilizations going forward. As for the layout of Greek temples, the styles varied greatly, but the main styles were circular or rectangular being far more popular. All Greek temples came in different shapes and sizes, each to honor an individual god or a whole host of them. As architecture progressed, we begin to see two layers of columns surrounding the temples. This is known as dipteral structuring. You will also notice that almost all Greek temples are longer than they are wide. This is because the ancient Greeks lacked the roofing technology to span large widths. As for exact dimensions, each of the main classical orders had default dimensions. Ionic structures were usually 6 by 11 columns, 8 by 15, or 8 by 20. Doric temples were usually 6 by 13, 6 by 15, or 8 by 17. The 8 by 20 Ionic temples were almost exclusively dipteral. What about the height of these temples? Well, Ionic temples were usually 6 meters, 10 meters, or 18 meters. Doric temples, on the other hand, were usually 4 meters, 8 meters, or 10 meters. You'll notice that Doric temples are shorter and simpler. This is because Doric was the first classical order and therefore less advanced. The inner layout of Greek temples is much more simple. Most temples consisted of three parts: the pronaos, the cella, and the opistodomes. Each of the cella rooms could house the statue of the main god, while the pronaos held lesser gods, and the opistodomes was decorative. Again, you'll notice that the temples were longer than they were wide. Now let's look at the outside of a Greek temple. Greek temples lacked frontality, which means that they looked relatively the same on all sides. Here we see a typical Eastern Greek temple. The blue part is called the pediment, which would be carved into various images. The roof, you will notice, is triangular. This made spanning distances easier and allowed rainwater to flow off more easily. Now let's move on to our third question, which is how were these temples built? Well, in order to understand how something is built, you have to know what it is built of. The materials of Greek temples included mud brick, limestone, and marble. The roofs were usually made out of terracotta tiling, like the pots you get at the grocery store, or marble tiling. The pediments and the statues that adorn the temple were made out of marble, and were exclusively carved. Building techniques included stone foundations and mud brick walls with wooden support for early temples. Later on, there were columns with wooden superstructures and columns that were made of multiple pieces that were stacked on top of each other. As roof technology improved, temples got bigger, a lot bigger. Then came stone. With the addition of stone, Greeks started not building just the foundations out of stone. They started building the entire temples out of stone. This resulted in bigger, more stable temples. The addition of dipteral structuring, which was the two-column thing we talked about earlier, and temples became less bulky and started to look a little bit better. Now for our fourth question, which is why were these structures built? It's pretty simple, really. The people of ancient Greece wanted to honor their gods, because they expected if they honored the gods well, the gods might pay them back by giving them good crops, which would then help the people, who would then worship the gods. Thank you for viewing the Greek architecture version of my Ancient World Explorers project. Please feel free to check out all the other videos in the set.